In this video, we are going to discuss the basics of standing and walking as related to sort of home training performance, how you can facilitate the original intentions of the child into getting the best out of it, and on the other hand, what kind of challenges and what sort of potential sort of landmines and pitfalls are there within the sort of standard approaches to training the walking and training the standing. At first glance, things look kind of simple. Like it's a very intuitive reasoning. Hey, if the child doesn't walk, let's kind of try to do the practicing, especially if the child likes it, and especially if she asks for it and everybody tells you that this is a good idea. So just support from the top or from the level or whatever and sort of get this walking-like performance. Now, is this going to help? In reality, no. So this has nothing to do with walking. So first of all, before we move on, let's have a look at the little kid here who is not yet walking, but who is practicing his elevation, right? So he grips himself up, then climbs up, climbs up, climbs up, gets on his feet, and oops, he is standing. So at first glance, everything is very, very obvious, like the logic of standing first and walking afterwards. So first you stand, because it's a static position, and then gradually you kind of try to get the dynamics. So this idea is very, very intuitive and sort of like seems like a no-brainer, the obvious thing, and so on. Reality is not like that. So what we have to understand is the way how the finer mechanisms of standing and walking are done, and what are the sort of the hidden elements there. Because also we will have to address another myth that assisting the walking via the wheels or via walking from somewhere else kind of helps the brain to learn about the walking, to figure out how the walking works. So we have to address all these misconceptions. So let's start with the basics, and here I'm just bringing the standard anatomical picture. So like that's the way that they're being drawn. Two legs, you feel that this is a wide base. The wide base gives you the firm standing, and once you've learned how to stand, then you would be able to do the walking. As I said, that's not the case. What we have to realize are the number of the key components, sort of what are the hidden stabilities that are sort of locked and looped inside the standing position, and what kind of controls and mobilities one has to develop in order to get into that evolution. So let me get back to this kid who is standing and get the idea of what we actually want to develop. So first point that I'm going to bring is actually quite simple. So let's start with a very simple equation. Don't be afraid, it's not going to be confusing by any means. So standing position means that you can see here that he has some weight distributed on his legs, and some weight is distributed by holding the fabric here. So what is the total equation? The total equation is very simple. So if we look at the 100% of his weight bearing, so this 100% of weight bearing consists of two parts. Part 1, that's the top support, and part 2, that's the bottom support. So that's really not difficult to understand. So that's the 100% of what he is doing now. So what do we see as the current situation? So roughly speaking, we can say 50% of his weight goes into the legs, and 50% of his total weight bearing comes from the top. So what would be the evolution. The evolution would be reducing the support that he generates from the top and increasing the support and the controls that he generates from the bottom. So that's very, very simple. And in that respect, we want to go from 50-50 to whatever, 40-60, then 30-70, and so on, until somewhere around, let's say, 10-90, he would be able to get into the critical step when 90% of the weight is already at the bottom. So he will be able to get into the critical step when he would try to do some dynamic activities. So first he would be falling, but then gradually things would develop. So this is the first point to understand, that in fact you want to have at least some sort of this 50-50 proximity before you can get any idea of the, before you can get any expectations of this redistribution and the progress. Because if the situation is kind of 10 and 90, oops, sorry, the other way around. So if the 90% is coming from the top and only 10% is coming from the bottom, well, this is not trainable. There is no way to build on this. And in that respect, that would have nothing to do with the walking, because it's not going to provide us with the essentials of the supports. So essentials of the supports, it's not just keeping the feet on the ground, because I kind of put it here as the 50-50 or as the 100%, but within that 100% support, there are several levels which are, each of them has to be at that sort of 100% itself. So it's like a nested doll of the controls which are inserted into it. So what are those? Those are the first thing. You need to have the control of the head. So what does it mean, the control of the head? It's not what you think. It's not having the control of the head over the shoulders. No. The control of the head means that you are able to contain any tendencies for the head locking forwards and associated swinging of the entire body. So it's not this little thing that you need to control, which is just from here to here. It's not this little circle that you need to control. You need to have the control of the neck, which is going to be capable to stop the entire body from falling. So that's the thing. So in that respect, the control starts here, that you're able to balance it from the top and then get all the waves underneath, which are going to be compatible within it. So none of them should topple you over. So that's really a very big and important idea. So that's the part that we would call, say, swaying, right? So you see, that would be the control of the sway, like a tree that sways in the top. But when it comes to the swaying of the tree, you think of it that it's actually being controlled from the root. But humans, we don't have this root, so we are not rooted to the ground. So our stability in first place comes from the top, the ability to contain the angular swaying, and in such a way that via the use of the head is going to be sort of the sky hook, so that you are able to lock the head in such a way that that would translate into the consolidation all the way to the bottom without losing the connections in between. So that's the first critical part. Now, from this we move to the next critical thing, which has to be very well controlled. So the next critical thing is, of course, the center of mass. I'm not talking about any order of priority, but just kind of giving you the most visible things. So the center of mass, your center of mass is somewhere here around the pelvic region. So, and the way that the center of mass is being controlled, that's a tricky thing. Again, we are looking at that thing from the top. So the top is the control there, right? So you see this control. And now this control has to come into this mid-level and then has to allow all sorts of the adjustments below. So in fact, this level, the center of mass, is the one that goes back and forth. So that's the adjustment that happens in first place in the forwards backwards in the sagittal plane. So in that sense, what you need to contain the top, and then within the top be able to sway the whole pelvis in such a way that you would maintain this kind of mid-section position. Notice the fact that I'm not talking here about the support of the legs, because we have to remember that the legs are the weakest link in the whole thing. The human legs are not supporting us in that kind of extended stance. So the legs are the most dynamic part. So, and that of course brings us to the part 3, which is about the legs as such. And now we will have to finally draw the long leg connection. That would be the leg connecting here all the way to the bottom. So that's the way how the leg grips to the ground. So the leg has to do the foot has to do a very good grip to the ground. So the grip without sliding, the grip without doing any kind of transition. So in that respect, that would be really the grip. It's not yet the support. You see the level of the knee and the hip and so on. It's not yet the support. So in that sense, it's the grip. And this grip comes from what could be seen as the long leg. So in that sense, that's the total long leg that goes all the way to the hip. So, and this is integration. So in that sense, what we are seeing, you obviously observed it in the healthy kids, what they're doing. They're not bending their hips in the beginning, right? So they're having this grip at the ground and they're swaying their pelvis back and forth. So that's what they're trying to do whilst holding with the arms. So that's the third part there, getting this control. And training of those parts, center of mass, the anti-sway mechanism here at the top, right? So which is combined with the vestibule and so on, and the ground contact. So those are completely different 3 mechanisms that you shouldn't confuse. But then, of course, there is a 4th thing. So in order to connect the top, the bottom, then you need to have the wave. So that would be kind of this wave of the undulations. So the undulations, this is the ability to get not just the big thing, right? Because in the beginning, what I've just discussed here, the anti-sway, the center of mass, and the grip on the ground. So these are just 3 parts. So that's the anti-sway, and this is the ground. So like this is sort of the sky hook, if we wish. So that's the sky hook. So the sky hook. So sky hook, center of mass back and forth, and the ground contact. So that's this thing. And again, if you would recall how the healthy kids are practicing during their standing in bed or something like this, that's what they do. But then the 3rd thing or the 4th thing has to add, which is this additional wave that comes through the spine. So at least we've got to get 1 wave there, and additional wave that comes through the legs. It's not bending yet, right? But it's just being able to get the wave through the hip, knee, and the ankle. So again, the wave requires at least 3 parts. So that's why for this wave we've got the neck, the thorax, and the lumbar. So that's the undulation. So the undulation, that's this 4th component that we are looking at, and that's the one that we are able to understand when we look at the child from the side. But then, of course, all that is still not bringing us to the walking, because the main thing about the walking is, of course, the way that it's done on the 1-by-1 leg basis. So once again, we are going to look at this picture, right? So the person who is in standing and the view from the back, and we'll notice one basic thing which is missing here. And the missing point is that humans don't walk on two legs. We walk using one leg at a time. So in that respect, what's happening? It's this diagonal connection. So that's the next equation that we have to take into account. So the next equation that we have to draw. So our first equation was top, bottom, right? So you see that was just a very simple thing. So the bottom is able to hold 100%, and this has to be 0. But then within this support from the bottom, it's not 50-50 that you would kind of intuitively think of. 50 for the left and 50 for the right. Not at all. The way that it works, it has to be 100%. 100% per leg. Because that's how we walk, and you notice, right? You watch some cross-country skiing, you see people running. It's the right leg, left arm, and the right arm, left leg. These diagonals. So why the diagonals are so important? Well, for a simple reason that this is the ones which are related to torsion. So the way that this whole thing works, it's torsional. So it's the rotation which goes in the spiral-like way, and it goes throughout the entire thing, and it has to change from leg to leg at the pelvic area. Why torsion? Well, for a simple reason, because torsion is the best, gives the best wind up, right? So you see, because the walking, we remember this basic thing. Everything that people do, healthy people, is based on 5% of the muscle action. 5% of the muscle activity gives us 100% of the functional output. So this 20 times ratio, that's kind of a minimum, right? So that's what we always have to keep in mind. So how is it possible to get this 20 times ratio? And the most surprising, right, is that for healthy people, what happens? You spend about 5% of energy, or 5% of this muscle effort, for walking, standing, crawling, sitting, lying down. So it's, at first, it's really a surprising finding. How come that when you are lying down and when you're walking, it kind of costs you about the same? So that's the trickiest thing, but that's the way that things are. When we get to those basics, the basics are basics. It's not a skill that has to be learned. It's the basics which is built in. It's a kind of presets of the total integration of the body. And when it's at that level, so the important point is to understand that the brain has nothing much to do with it. So the brain is a happy recipient of this thing. So the brain doesn't participate much. It's all kind of running on the autopilot of the what is called the morpho computation. So it's the computation, it's the way how the body computes it itself without adding much of the additional effort from the higher levels of the brain. But the way this is possible is through rotations, because if you look at the spirals, right, if you take any object, take your mask, right, so now we're in the COVID times, and start twisting it. So start twisting it along the axis. So what's going to happen? The thing starts resisting, and then if you release it, you see it springs back. So that is that energy, or it's like it works like a kind of clock spring, right? So if you take this watch spring and so on, it accumulates energy across the plane of movement and then releases it. Accumulates and releases. So that's why our walking is effortless. And that's why we're able to potentiate it all the way from the top and connect it through the bottom. So this rotational thing is so critical. And if you notice what typically happens to the children, what happens to their legs and so on, they twist, right? So the legs cross, or they open up as a frog into the external rotation. So the legs never keep themselves in the middle unless the person has been trained in this kind of dog-like standing fashion. So that's really the key, and that's a very, very, very big difference. So we work like that. So that's why for us the pelvis is the critical part. And I believe I have to clarify my reference to the dog so that you don't get it wrong. So you see, that's the dog, and that's the iliopsoas muscle in the dog. Now, if you notice two things, how the dogs are moving, or how any quadrupeds are moving. So they are running, right? So you see, and then either they're using a little bit of this kind of cross-leg performances, but for them to do any bigger jumps and so on, so when they kind of gallop, so they always work in this sagittal plane, so they don't twist. They are flat, right? So you see, if you look at any dog, the dogs are flat like that. So humans are kind of round, and dogs and the others, they are flat in the sagittal plane. So if you think about, so like the dogs are, the dogs are like this, crocodiles are like that, right? So you see they're flat in the frontal plane, this is sagittal plane, and humans, we are round. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. So now, if we look at the dog, this is the way they run. So therefore, for dogs, this is a huge and super important muscle. And now you can visualize what happens if we put the dog to stand. If we put the dog to stand, what does she need to do? Well, obviously, she needs to bring these legs backwards, and she needs to bring the body forwards. What is she going to use? Of course, she's going to use this iliopsoas, right? So that's going to be her main way of stabilizing herself. Why? Because she doesn't have the rotations. But of course, the dog, the circus dog, right? You know, and it's also only the relatively small dog that can stand on this hind legs, right, and who can jump and kind of move, the poodles or something like this. But any larger dog, which is like, I don't know, 30 kilos and more, so those dogs, they can't get on the hind legs, right? So you see, they need to put additional support there, and they cannot walk. They can only hop on those legs. So that's really their key point, to understand that this is the dog style, right? That's not the human styles. We are not like that. We are like this. We are wide, and we have this possibility to get the rotation. So that's a critical difference between us and dogs. But that's now, whilst we understand this, right? So we understood some basics there, the four key elements, and then now we understood the rotations. So in that sense, integration of the rotations in those counter fashions, so this is the key thing for us, right? So it's not a very good drawing, so you have to tell me, oh, Mr. Blyum, you're making mistakes here. And I would say, yes, of course, because what I should have done, I should have done this, right? So you see, to put the colors diagonally here, like that. So that I would be then giving you the right picture. And then, of course, the next question you have to ask, but when you develop this rotational thing, which is the essence of walking, this torsional thing, when you develop it, ask yourself a question. Are you going to develop it all the way from the bottom? Are you going to develop it all the way from the feet? Or this rotation has to descend? Start with the super short legs and then gradually get further down until finally reaching the ground. I think the answer is very obvious, right? So it has to develop this primary engine of walking, so the one which is also called the spinal engine. So there is a significant research done on the amputees by the Montreal researcher Dr. Serge Grakovetsky, who's been studying the spinal engine in the amputees, so people who do not have the legs below whatever the thigh. So, but with them, things are working. This engine is working, so this rotational, the twister there works. So for us, that's really a very big lesson. And now we will need to get some illustrations for this lesson so that we get the idea of how it all works in reality, so that you pay attention to the right things. So what is the main lesson that we have to learn, right? So any attempt to do the walking without this distribution translates into what, right? So you see, without those controls at the top, at the center of mass at the bottom and as the wave, right? So without those components, when the legs hit the ground, so what happens? You get this iliopsoas triangle. So that's a typical story, right? I've talked about it many times, and in that sense, there is really like nothing that could be much worse than that. So what we observe in the children who are being forcefully put to stand, well, the body just got into the position that it has to do now without all the internal controls. It has to get into the way of how to prevent the buckling of the legs, right? The buckling, so that's effectively collapsing under the weight, right? And in that sense, we are back to the dog style thing. So effectively, you always have to remember that verticalized dog, because here you can see really, right? So you see that's exactly that triangle of iliopsoas. And in that sense, it's the muscle which in humans is not participating much, right? So in us, this is the muscle which is not like really doing much, and in us, this muscle has been mainly converted in the facility in the ones that facilitates the rotations. So it's it's being converted into the one that contributes positively into that storage of the twist, and then so it twists and then releases, twists and then releases. Unlike the dogs, where it accumulates this spring-like action. So it works like this type of a spring, like a flat spring that is used, for example, for the heavy, well, in the past, those kind of springs were used for the heavy trucks and lorries. So it's a completely different way, the human usage of the iliopsoas and the dog usage of the iliopsoas. When we put the child who is not ready for the rotations to stand, instead of the human usage of the iliopsoas, you end up getting the dog usage of the iliopsoas. So that's exactly what you get through standing frames and through all other activities which pretend and try to get the standing as the basis of the walking, right? In a more human way, that's how it looks like, right? So you see this is this triangle, and of course we know that the triangle is the most stable structural configuration. So yes, the iliopsoas is able to do this job, not happily, right? So getting this, it's a return to the dog style, not to the human one. So it's kind of several generations back in evolution, but in case there is nothing else, right? So because all the rotational components are not helping, so then we've got the problem. And I invite you to rewatch my webinar on scoliosis, where I discuss the point that torsion, the resistance to torsion is related to the polar moment of inertia, which is the greatest at the perimeter. So that's why it's the perimeter that has to deal with the rotations, and it's the more circular you are, the easier it's to do. But the iliopsoas is inside. So, of course, what happens, it tightens, it shortens, it does all those things to convert the person into that dog-like performance. And that's exactly what we see here. That's exactly what we see in particular there, right? So you see, okay, imagine that was the standing frame, right? So that would be this exact thing. But this is even worse than the standing frame because this thing has wheels, right? And once there are wheels, then it only aggravates everything because the wheels, they have the rolling action, right? So they have the rolling action. So now she has to catch up. So she has to build this triangle from the bottom because otherwise the legs would just buckle. So, you know, instead of the dealing with the rotations and so on. So she needs to build this triangle. So in fact, of course, that's a destructive action. So that has nothing to do with human walking. It's basically training a person like a circus dog. So, but you know that the circus dogs, they don't benefit from this walking, right? So you see, and in fact, most of the countries now are moving towards prohibition and banning of this sort of cruel animal experiments which the circus acts are. Unfortunately, when it comes to the children, everybody is still enthusiastically doing it with their kind of best intentions in mind. And the easiest way to see it is here, right? So look, the moment she's being placed in the chair, look what happens to the legs, right? So they just dangle and stretch according to this triangulation of the iliopsoas. So everything is very straightforward. But now let's have a look at the good things, right? So we were talking about the fact that we need to develop the rotations, and the rotations are to be developed from the super short legs using and activating that spinal engine. And on the other hand, the important part, not just the spinal engine, but the grip to the ground. You see, when your sitting bones become your feet, so they are becoming the feet when the child is playing correctly. See here, she's sitting on the ground. What she's doing? She's doing the rotations. She's doing rotations. She's exploring. She is rocking. Now, what is she doing here in this move? Here she's doing what we were discussing, right? She is practicing the sky hook control of the sway from the top. She is rocking, so that means that she would be practicing some undulations, and she is, of course, controlling her center of mass. So my point is to help you to understand that standing and walking consists of these, not the building blocks, right? So that's the key point. Not the building blocks, but the building processes. So that's really the key idea. So these are the building processes, and practicing those building processes has to be done in the easiest way. So building processes, again, they could only come into play when you are down at this 5% or as close to the 5% of the muscle action as possible. Because once your muscles are working whatever at 50% or even at 30%, that's too much. So that's a protective mode. That's the emergency mode. They're not designed to work like this. So as a result, they would be just using the brain, which would be activating just the shortcuts of the greatest kind of or immediate resistance, which comes with the least cost. And because the iliopsoas is such an ancient muscle, which kind of we have from our whatever quadruped ancestors, so it's the easy thing to recruit, and instead of the human usage, the rotational human usage of the iliopsoas, it's easy to switch them into the dog usage, right, into the dog usage, cat usage, whatever way, if you want a cheetah or a lion or a wolf or whatever, or a deer. So all of them, they run the same way. Or the horse, like they all have this very powerful iliasources. Why? Because they are sagittal movers, right? So you see they are moving like that. So they are stretching, springing, and then loading, and that's how they use this muscle as a kind of as a spring, right? As the one that sort of just cocks the gun and then releases it. So that's really, so it's the gun gets cocked and then releases the cock release. So it's this type of it's working as this type of the spring, right? So you see this type of the spring. But for us, it's a completely different way how our bodies work, and we don't want to get this this kind of downgrade. So, and if we continue, there will be a lot more of those interesting moves as we will see them. So, whoops, no, that's not the one. Look at that. You see, for example, what is she doing? She is moving on the ground. What is she practicing? All kinds of rotations, right? So she's practicing all kinds of rotations, and you can see what she's doing. She's doing those super short legs. So she's practicing that swaying, right? So where is her most stable point? At the top. So she's practicing this anti-sway control. So, and there is more of this. Look at this performance on the ground. See? Look, she is reaching, playing, and then removing the leg and rotating the leg and getting all this kind of finer actions. So look at that, right? And then look at this. What is she doing? She is rotating. She is doing the swinging of the hands, right? To do this kind of counter moves. So that's more in style how this guy would develop. And now we're moving to the big question that you probably ask, but how would we make her get onto her long legs? Like now we understand how she's working with the short legs, so how she's doing all sorts of rotation. And let me show you some more, right? You see all that. This is the controls, right? So all sorts of the controls which are happening at the sitting platform. And look, she's practicing the movement backwards. So all these are sophisticated actions. Sophisticated actions where she's exploring all these moves. So that's very different, of course, from the usage of the wheelchair, right? We can see here the moment, the person immediately starts tilting back. So this is really that exploration. Look at that. Look at that play. And pay attention to what's happening at the bottom, how the legs are working. So these are the sitting platforms. These are the sitting platforms. That's where she sits. That's what she uses. So that's the lesson 2, right? You see, look at this. So this is all practicing. Wow, look at that. These guys are practicing in synchronicity. Look at the boy to the right, right? So you see that's the healthy brother, and they are really practicing in this synchronicity, showing you what's in common in kids' development. So you see, when he is doing that, when he is doing this, he is obviously practicing the right kind of action. Yes? Oops, let me move him like this. Right, so look at that, perfect synchronicity. Well, I didn't even notice this one before. Look at this is so cool. So how they are exploring this center of mass and their anti-sway control, the sky hook controls, so which are then going to be converted into the next steps of the development. So that's what we really, I hope you're now seeing very well, and we are getting back to this question that you must be asking. Well, how we are going to develop this, the long legs standing. So the rule number one, the rule number one, the rule number one, the rule number one, nothing hard. Right? So you see, that's the key point. Because what you want to get the maximum activation of the foot for the grip. So that's your key point. And on the hard part, it's much more difficult to switch the load and then the lift of the leg. Right? So let's kind of get this idea clear. See, when she is standing here, unfortunately, it's kind of all black here, so it's not so visible. But look, she is fully supported by the sofa, and now she is only using one leg for support, right? And how is she doing it? She is doing it playfully. She is shifting her weight onto this 100% usage. So I want to repeat this basic thing. See, I'm just using this kind of artificial position, but it has the names of all the muscles and so on. So, and this guy grips very well to the ground. So that's what you can really see here, the grip to the ground. And then we look here, you need the strong grip to the ground. So to contain this part, to contain the way how the leg rolls over the foot. So you need this control, and you need the way how the leg rolls over the foot. So that's the arrow that you can see here. So this is the next part of the control. So if you don't have the strong grip to the ground, you would not be able to have this next level. So, and this next level is part of that undulation, right? That wave that I was talking about earlier. So that's why, you have to remember that the entire foot has multiple levels, these big connections. And when we look at it from the side, so this is where that grip is concentrated. So that's why getting on the hard surface is not a good thing. So you're not able to activate this level. So you're not training the deep separations within the foot when it's hard. So by just kind of passing the load more onto the top. So that's why this is really, really good. See, in that sense, this is a 3.5-year-old girl, not too big, but in that sense that the sofa is just a perfect thing. It's safe, it's explorative. Look at the way how she's doing and how she is standing on this thing, right? Using the weight shifts, and what is she doing now, right? Practicing the center of mass and practicing the waves. Look at that, right? So do you think this is possible in their standing frame? Of course not. Look at that. So you see her feet are all the way on the ground, and she is shifting those weights, right? Remember, we talked about the necessity to switch the weight on a single leg. So this is what you actually want to see. And look, when she's tired, she can rest, and then she does this wave-like action, right? So you see, those are the undulations. The undulations, the small movements. But remember what I said in my many other videos. Before you can get this super quality performance, right? So you see, look, she's only using one leg. You see, she's like the leg is in the air. So before you can do this and do this counter sway, of course, a big recipe there is the development of the counter waves and the undulations whilst lying down. So once again, I want you to see here the key processes, right? So undulation is a key process. So if your child cannot do this, see, I want you to see the link. Like I want to see their undulations. And if she is only able to practice undulations here on the floor, so you have to create the opportunity for her to do more of that, right? To get the situations when she would be doing more of those. If she is able to do the undulations in sitting, so you want to create the situations when there would be more sitting. So you want to look at the key processes. That's my main message. That what you want to understand from this, that it's not about the position. Of course, when you get when you transit and upgrade from the floor position to the one like more vertical, right? So you see, then it's a lot of additional loads which are coming through, and it will take some further time, right? So you see, to develop it, and it will require, you know, your work to facilitate this. But this is really the key point. See how that transition is happening. So that's the evolution, that's the practicing. So those are the key processes. But also pay attention to the thing, is that effectively she is, if you look at these two cases, so this is the girl lying down on the ground, right, and making all these moves. And now imagine we just lifted the floor, and the floor became that the backrest of the sofa. So she's effectively lying down and standing at the same time. So later you can maybe change the angle and so on, but this is really the best opportunity to practice. And you can also add any, you know, additional depth to the sofa itself. You can use the memory foam there and so on. So you, or if the child is standing in their kind of the baby bed or something like this, you can do this. So that's really the point, because once again, when we talk about the kids who are in the better condition, their feet are much thicker. See, their feet are much thicker. They have much more of the internal cushion. So that's why for them, even when they stand on something relatively hard, they still have this buffering, this kind of bounce back component. And the kids with CP, they don't, right? So their feet are much thinner. They don't have enough of those buffering components. So that's why you want to utilize sofas. And this is really such a great opportunity over here. So these are some key ideas. And once again, the more you understand how the things work, the more you realize how all this type of the artificial walking things, they are not even not helping, they are actually being destructive, because instead of working on the right processes, it effectively just takes it as a dog and, you know, just basically gives you a dog training. That's pretty much it. You know, like, look at the human depth. That's the human depth, you know, that's the dog, you know, like human depth. Look at the sophistication that we have at all this level. So that's what we want to build. We want to build all this depth, but the key point for us is to get the maximum distribution, right? So that's our main point. So, and get it all further deeper and so on, and at the same time distribute it through the pelvis. So these are the key ideas which you would hear from me over and over again. But in this video, I wanted to be as specific as possible, and, you know, I want you to get the image of this dog performance, which you don't want to get, and I want you to see this way how the child develops in sitting, building blocks of their control of the center of mass, of the sky hook, of the undulations, of the grip at the ground. So all of those components, they do not require standing. So it's enough for you to get the super short legs. But if your child is not yet in none of those situations, get inspired by this, right? So that's how the undulations and the waves work. So I hope that this video is helpful and that would encourage you to understand how things works and how the things work with standing. And in that respect, I would obviously invite you to share it as much as possible with you know, the other families, even those who are not doing ABR, because basically these are the universal rules. You see here, I wasn't talking about the ABR exercises or any kind of specifics. We were just talking about the things how to do, what are the do's and what are the don'ts, what are the kind of activities to encourage and what to be happy with, right? So when you look at these activities, so it's not just the toys, you can see how much of this additional development is taking place. So my main message there is that really to kind of pass it to a wider audiences, and in that sense to give the additional tools of how people can organize things at home and stop kind of doing the wrong things and get more of the right things. So thank you very much for your attention, and well, you know, as much as you can help to spread those videos, we would really appreciate it. So thank you very much, all the best, and keep sending us questions, and I will be continuing to produce these videos to help you with the improved understanding. Cheers! Bye-bye!